Hey everyone, this is the next installment from Vintage Sewing Machine Garage, and this of course is the Singer 15 from around 1906 that I've been talking to you folks about and sharing with you some of my methods, just some brief hints about ways to approach the restoration of a sewing machine. I've mentioned to you guys that I tend to go in different areas of the machine when I'm wanting to restore it. And a couple of things I'm just kind of going over. I always mention to everyone to go slow. For example, this knob affects how the stitch length is adjusted. And if you look underneath here, you can see the mechanism for that moving. But a lot of times when you get an old machine, you may find that the knobs are stuck. They're not broken, they're just frozen up because old oil over many years gets like glue, and parts of a sewing machine will be basically frozen, right? They're like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. They need gentle prodding to move again, and sometimes I use things like liquid wrench and other things that you guys have seen these in the hardware store, things that you can use to loosen up hardware, but you never force things, right? If it's not ready to move, then you want to give it time. And there are different methods for doing that. You can use hair dryers and different things when you're trying to get old grease loose, but again, you always want to be careful because you can damage a machine when you're trying to restore it. So today, actually, when I make my video for showing this machine operating as a doing its sewing, I'm going to show you guys how basically with the bobbin winder over here, it's kind of interesting because the bobbin winder is in wonderful shape. These springs are very likely the original springs from 1906. They still work great. And I'll demonstrate for you, you may see other videos online on how to use the older style bobbin winders. They work great. They're just set up a little differently than the later ones that many of you who have vintage machines are used to. But everything here is actually looking great, working great. There's a little dust here, and I'm going to be, going in here and removing some of the old grease and dust that obviously collects over time. But it hasn't harmed the mechanism at all. And I'm going to also be adding a new bobbin winder tire on here, and of course I'll need to get one that's a different size because most of the tires are a little smaller than this, but I'll find one that fits. But what I really wanted to talk to you all about today was the paint finish. Now, when I started this, I mentioned to you a lot of you like to go in and try to clean up the machine first, and that's actually something I normally save for last. I get off any heavy dust or debris that might be on the machine. You never know what you'll find. And then I start going through the different areas of restoration that I've been showing you some of in the videos. But I wanted to talk today about the finish. And people sometimes, there are people who paint vintage sewing machines. I often recommend that you don't paint a machine. They can look really cool. I think you've probably seen some of the hot rod colors people have done vintage sewing machines. And if that's something you want, I think they're beautiful. But to repaint an old sewing machine is extremely time consuming. To do it properly with the right kinds of paints and to protect all of the parts of the machine that cannot be painted, it is a major endeavor and a very costly one. But personally, I love preserving the machines as best I can, and so what I'm going to attempt to do is to clean the machine, but I'm going to do it gently. I'm going to show you different things you might want to try when you are trying to clean the surface of a sewing machine. And the first thing I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about what most of the vintage machines that were black, sort of the chemistry of their paint, and how the chemistry of the paint determines what you use on here that can hopefully be safe and not cause more problems than it fixes. So I'm going to talk to you about that, and then we'll take a look at some of the products that I found that can be helpful. Okay, guys, I wanted to go get my fabric set up, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what you might use to actually polish a machine, or to what you're going to use to clean it. This is a part of something that is made from acrylic fabric. It's synthetic. This is one of the things I suggest you not use. If the problem is not that it doesn't have a texture and that will clean, the problem is synthetic fibers have a lot of problems, one of which is they don't really absorb anything. And so what I have found is if you use a synthetic, these are rags that I've got that I'm going to be using to clean this with, what you'll find is that it generally moves things and then smears them around, but it doesn't actually help you clean the machine very often. So I really think if you try synthetics, you're not going to be happy. But what you really would want is something that is made of cotton. And you can do two things. This is a piece of an old blue jean. You guys have seen me do a lot of test stitching on these before. Now denim, of course, has a texture to it, and sometimes you might want that to help remove some of the old oil and soiling. And then, of course, you can also use cotton. This is an old beat-up sweatshirt that's very old. It's incredibly soft, and this is something that that is a great buffing tool. And I'm going to basically show you what areas you might want to use these in. Now first I'd like to talk a little bit about the chemistry of the way these machines were painted. The vast majority of vintage sewing machines were painted in a black paint. It probably had a lacquer base, but it was a very thick coating. It probably had multiple coats. There was a heating process. It wasn't baked on in the sense that porcelain is baked in a kiln, not that hot. But they wanted to accelerate the drying time of the paint because they were in production. They were moving. They needed to get these things done and ready for sale. So they would apply these rather thick coats of black paint to the body and the chassis, and then they would apply decals. And you can see the decals here. Really beautiful. This is called, again, the Tiffany design. And you can also see down in the bottom where the decals have worn away. Those decals were protected by today we would call it clear coating, but in those days it was basically a lacquer. And any of you are familiar with lacquers know that nothing really replicates how lacquers are gorgeous. Nothing can really come close to the depth and the shine you get from lacquer. Lacquer, however, is a somewhat delicate paint finish. It can be harmed by chemicals and even too much abrasion. And to be fair, this is a 1906 machine. And when you see, for example, those of you who are collectors, if you ever see one of these machines and the decals are perfect and they're not new, they're original decals, that can drive up the cost or the price of a machine for those of you who collect. I saw a Singer, a later 15 recently on eBay, and it sold for, maybe it was on another auction site. Anyway, it sold for over $200 unrestored. And that was because its lacquer was perfect, its decals were perfect. But for my purpose, I look at machines to rescue them because I want them to sew again and be used as these amazing machines they were. So the aesthetics are okay. In fact, in this situation, I could literally remove these and try to put new decals on, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave, this area where this has worn away. I can't imagine how many people, how many sewing projects in the last 100 years. So there's sort of there's a provenance, not a provenance. There's a history to these machines that I think is sometimes shown in this. And this is a very subjective area, I know that. But anyway, I'm going to basically clean the machine as best I can and then leave the patina of its use as part of its history. And that's my goal with most machines, because all of the time and labor I spend on a machine, I want my customers to know that they're paying for the restoration of the mechanics of the machine. And there is some aesthetic work. I'm trying to decide, for example, do I want to polish the nickel plate here on the metal? I could, but then, do I want to do that here and on the back, and then everything else have this sort of nice amber patina? I may leave them. We'll see. I haven't decided. But anyway, talking about the paint. So there are different ways that you can clean and try to shine the original finish on an old machine like this. Now, one of the first and the easiest, it may surprise some of you, is sewing machine oil. Because if you think about it, the oiling holes were right here. People were expected to oil their own machines at home. The engineers who created these, they knew that oil was going to get on the machines. And so the paints and the lacquers are pretty darn resistant to oil. In fact, I often use oil to clean them with. And the oil will sometimes loosen up old dirt that's in the finish without harming it. Now, having said that, everything I'm going to show you guys today, always test on your machine, because you never know with different manufacturers, different production runs. You don't want to look at some video some guy made and then see, oh, well, it didn't work on mine. Always test first and make sure that the finish is okay with what you're doing, and that doesn't matter whatever you're using, whatever machine. I have found that some of the things I use to clean machines will work great on the black lacquer machines, but on the later machines that were painted in those beige enamel paints, sometimes they can react with those and not these, and vice versa. So always, your mileage may vary, as the old saying goes, always use caution and test anything before you put it on your machine. That's what I do. Even when I look at, when I read on people's blogs and see what they're doing, I always want to test it for myself. So always do that. So sewing machine oil, I'm going to show that to you guys. So I'm going to show you, and I have a fairly light colored sweatshirt here with a little, I'm just going to put, this is right down on the front bed. I'm just putting some drops of sewing machine oil on here, and I'm going to start rubbing. One of the nice things about sewing machine oil, it'll give you an instant gloss. You can see what the depth of that lacquer must have looked like when someone got this machine delivered to their home back in 1906. So I just did this, folks, on the bed, and the bed tends to be a little more cleaner than some areas, and you can see, you guys see this, the dirt and soil that came up through the lacquer finish, and again, I haven't harmed it, and it's actually beautiful. Now, I'm also going to put some sewing machine oil directly on this piece of denim. I'll make sure I'm putting this in front of the camera where you can see it. I'm going to come up top here where there might be a little bit more grime because oil tended to sit up here a lot more. Now, notice when I'm rubbing this finish, even though there's a lacquer clear coat protecting the decals, remember, this is true everywhere, particularly on the bed, some of that lacquer, of course, has worn away because the decals have. So go gently. Don't get in there and start scrubbing it like you're scrubbing a bathtub, because you can really harm. You can actually make your machine look worse and take away these wonderful decals from 1906. So notice I'm going slow and careful, and I don't know if you can see this on camera. Got some sunlight here, but there's some soiling that's being picked up. Now, here's the deal with the sewing machine oil. Because it is so gentle, it's very effective. It can take a while. You can spend quite a few hours pulling more and more soiling with this oil until you get down to a really nice, beautiful finish. There are other methods you can use. Now, this is a product that I found it in a automotive car parts store. The place where you go to get all kinds of stuff to clean your car, and it's called Tough Stuff. Now, the reason I bought this is because it's a foam cleaner. You don't want to start pouring liquid cleaners over anything like this because it's a machine, and you'll start causing problems with the machine itself. But this comes out as a foam. You may have seen it in some of the photos that I post on Craigslist, one of my restoration and overhauls of the machines. I use this, but again, if you put this on the beige, the later 1950s machines that have the beige and the other colors of enamel paint, it will dull the finish. Okay, it's very strong. A lot of cleaners work by changing the pH, so this is a very alkaline cleaner. It works great on car carpets, which is what it was invented for, and upholstery. But if I use it, if I have a particularly dirty area of a machine, right, so I'll take this foam, and it looks like shaving cream, but it's not. And I'm going to put it, but you've got to be very careful with this product. Because it's alkaline, I have found that on most of my black lacquer machines, it will clean the lacquer and not harm it. And I say most. But notice the decals. Whenever the lacquer has been broken, you'll notice, I don't know if you guys can see this, but if you ever see a decal where it starts to look silver instead of gold, that is because a cleaner like this or some other has been used. And those beautiful gold decals will turn silver. You'll actually damage them with a harsh cleaner. So never get any of this stuff on the decal. Right? So that makes it a little tricky. If I want to come in here, I've got to be real careful, again, not to hit the decal. And you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And look at all the soiling it pulled off, right? It pulled it off quicker and I'm getting more,